Okay, Randall, let's take a look at this piece. Some 10,000 foot observations right out of the gates. We're probably over 50% ag in a lot of these areas here. 50% pasture, 50% row crops. Let's switch a screenshot here, get a little better look at what is actually row crops versus pasture. The stuff that shows up brown or is usually some kind of row crop. Not all the time, depends upon time of year, but usually is. But when we look at your property specifically, then what that creates is where a big wood setting would have lines of movement everywhere, not limited by cover because there's covers everywhere. We have these lines of movement. Anywhere this creek bottom is, line of contiguous cover. There's multiple places for deer to get on and off your property. Big chunk of woods onto your property. Here's a funnel onto your property. Here's a pretty nice chunk of woods onto your property. They can flow back off the property here. They can get over here. 1, 2, 3 different ways to get off the east side, and then multiple ways to flow off the south side too. So we got a lot of contiguous cover there that flows on and off the property. So part of an overall plan on this property is to figure out what your neighbors do. If these neighbors are queering these lines of movement so they don't move during the day, we can have more access along that property line. If these neighbors over here don't hunt, we don't want to mess up this deer flow. We want to hunt that deer flow. So that repeats itself on every single line on your property, depending on what the neighbors do. Another consideration on your property when I look at it, when I go back to a LiDAR-based application, is you have enough topography on this property to bed deer on any wind. So typically, if we do a full plan on a map like this, we're going to pull out specific things about where the timber is, where the deer are going to bed based upon topography. So if I kind of half float this so you can see where the timber is a little bit, you can see with a north wind, we're going to bed deer all over this leeward side here on this face. We're going to bed all over the place here. So we got to be careful that when we do that, if we know deer are bedded there with a north wind, this looks like it's probably an access road here, I'm sure. We got to make sure we're not driving that access road if they can see that. One tool we have to look and see if those deer can see us when we're using that area is if I pull this view shed tool down to right here, put it at a deer's bedded height, hit OK. Whatever turns red is what the deer can see when we access there. And you can see if we drive that access road, we're blowing up all these deer that want to bed on this north-facing ridge. So that needs to be repeated across your entire property, and it needs to be repeated for different winds. What happens after we do that is we end up with at least 4 different maps that we can overlay on each other to lay out access plans, and then we put in a buffer for the access to tell us if those deer can see us. And it's really kind of a process of elimination because I only see one major access point for your property down here. And you might have more. You might have neighbors that let you drive on, but from what it looks like on the map, you only have one way on this property. So because of the topography, there's no way to sneak across this property top to bottom so the deer know we're there. So what we're doing is we're picking the access routes with the least impact on the local deer herd. And what that means is there's probably always going to be a few deer that see us as we try to access on and off this property. But the bedding spots that work with the topography that don't mess with access, we're going to improve those. So if I can improve this bedding up here or this bedding down here because it's not affected by us accessing the property, I'm going to improve those bedding areas. Let those bedding areas hold deer because I'm not blowing those bedding areas up when I move on and off the property. So the topography on a property like this, especially with the size, 180 acres on here, means there's a lot of homework to do to try to put a whole plan together to figure out how we move through this property. Now, once we figure out how we move through the property and we base that upon bedding, then we mix in where the food plots are going to go. Once we know where we can make the improvements for the deer bedding or where the deer like to bed, find the least impactful routes to travel through the property to access with different winds, then we can start mixing in, okay, with the north wind, the food plots will work here, here, and here. With the west wind, two of those same 3 food plots will work. But we can build that access on top of that to the food plots that matches with the access throughout the property and where the deer are going to be bedded. So in a nutshell, a lot of things to consider. If we can hunt these lines of movement, we don't want to destroy those. If the neighbors destroy those lines of movement, that can become access for us. So that's one major consideration. Another major consideration is the topography, because all things being equal, which they're not, some of this is wooded, some of this is open, but all things being equal, we can look at the topography and decide where the deer are going to bed with different winds. So we have to look at that to plan our access around that so we can move through this property and disturb as few deer as possible. and then find our morning and our entrance and exit routes based upon the topography, because we're going to have some thermal sinks here when it's dark, when the ground is cooler than the air. We're going to have thermal sinks pulling our scent down into these low spots. We got a drainage here, we got a drainage here, and we got a drainage here. And all the scent from up top, when the ground is colder than the air, is getting pulled down there in the bottoms. Traditionally, that's where the deer are going to spend a lot of those transition hours. First dark, first light, they're going to be down there because they can travel through there without being seen and smell everything up top. And then conversely, in the evenings or during the day when the ground is warmer than the air, all that scent comes out of these bottoms and it rolls uphill up to these tops that the deer use for different scenarios. They can check bed feed, they can check rut travel, different things like that. So, and then we get all done, we can take the bedding areas that we've improved, and that's going to create some lines of travel for us that the bucks are going to use during the rut. If we know where the does are at, and we make the improvements based upon topography that we don't disturb with access, we know with very good confidence the does are going to be there. The bucks know they're there as well. All we have to do is find some land features and some improvements that connect those dots of doe bedding, and we know where the bucks are going to be on their feet during the rut. So it's topography makes planning difficult because it's harder to get around a property without the deer detecting you. But typically what that means is the reward is that in these areas with topography, we have more older age class deer because they use it to their advantage. So if you can hunt smarter than everybody else in your immediate neighborhood here, if they're blowing up their property and the deer are setting up in order to be able to make it so the humans can't surprise them, and we're doing the opposite, we're able to be a little more sneaky getting through here, they're going to feel more comfortable on our property moving during daylight, and we're going to get more cracks at those whitetails than the neighbors are. So if you want help with the full plan, that's what we'd be looking at when we do this whole property. If you're just looking for some brief things, that this should hopefully help you out too. And if you want more help, please get a hold of Sean, and he can give you some price quotes and things like that on what we would be doing if we were to do a full aerial plan on your property. Sorry for the delay, Randall. The KML was kind of coming through goofy, but I finally found it on Onyx Maps last night, so I was able to trace all this in. But better late than never, I guess. So we'll get this out to you. Thank you.